Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and dive right in and do a project. Going to integrate in some of the stuff from the previous videos and show you a bit more. We're going to hit the ground running. There's a lot of different pieces you're going to want to pay attention to that all sort of play into how to do this project. So let's start with a problem. Okay, this is what coding does: is it's an attempt to solve problems. So let's start with a problem. No matter what you do or your friends do, when you write your bibliography, your MLA bibliography, so the final page, you get marked down for the spacing and the periods and all that stuff. Well, there are pieces of, there's online stuff out there. One was called easybib, where you plug in information and then click, and then it gives you the correct spacing and all that stuff. And if you recall from the previous video where you have that entire string where you have things in quotes, and then you do a plus, and then you do a quote space, plus, and all of that stuff, that's how you accomplish this. And by the way, that joining of information, that's called concatenate. So we are going to take bits of information and concatenate it, and then make sure it's in the format that is acceptable for MLA. Now, there are a lot of moving pieces. So first up, you're going to want to pause and create a form. So go ahead and pause now. Okay. Secondly, you have to kind of latch onto this concept. With JavaScript, you have things that automatically load. So if you load into, say, Nike, and there's something like a carousel of pictures, that's like an automatic load. If you want your user to interact with your page, so you put in, whoopsie daisies. So in here, you put in information, and then they click a button, and then it spits something out. You're going to have to put that together in a function. And the way that we're going to arrange our function, the coding is going to be, I don't want to say messy, but redundant. There are ways to code it more simply, but I don't want to overcomplicate and throw too much stuff at you right off the bat. So the first thing I want to show you is ID. And most of the time, so it works similar to class. So if you remember class and how you set that up, you put, whatever class you want in there for CSS. And you can still do this too. You can add classes and style the boxes and style the button. So let's say that you have a class. The next thing you want to do is ID. And right now we're just going to kind of leave it blank like that. So let's go ahead and set up each of our inputs with that. Now, what you're doing, so classes for the CSS, okay, but ID is going to be used for the JavaScript. And if you think about it, right now, the browser doesn't know what you're putting in here, okay? So you type stuff in, and what it is you use JavaScript to tell the browser to identify it. So, if you put in your last name, you have to tell the browser, I want you to read this information and do something with it. And that's why you have to set up an ID. So we have these set up right here with IDs. We have to identify it. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to declare a variable. Okay, so the variable is whatever is going to be input into those form boxes. Now I showed you variable and Code is always updating itself and language is always evolving. In this case, we're going to use const as like constant, meaning this variable is, it's going to be stuck in place. So like if you only want to use a variable once and you don't want to have it, reproduce itself, or you're not going to use the variable over and over and over, you want to use const. And just like in any bibliography, you have a last name, so we're going to give it the name lname. So the next thing we do is we do an equals, and then we do something we call document, because we're going to be looking at, spell it right, we're going to be looking at this document. The document is the web page, dot, and then get element by ID. Okay, what elements are we going to be looking for? We're going to be looking for lname, quote lname, there we go, dot value, and then semicolon. So we are getting, so we're saying in the document, we want you to get elements by ID. The element is this input, okay? So it can be any element, could be form, could be input, could be button. Those are all elements, but you want it to look at the correct one. So L name, and remember, you can call a variable whatever you want. So this is just lname, so L and then capital N, but the name itself, you can name it whatever you want. You can call it, for the sake of arguing, let's call it last, okay, for last name. And you want your naming to be consistent, because if you put in a ton of JavaScript, you're going to have to go back and read it and you'll forget what you did. So you have all these spaces. So you have a last name, and obviously you have first name. And I'm just going to keep this simple. I'm not going to necessarily format this correctly. That's for you to do. I'm just throwing in samples. So you have book, and let's say you have year. So I'm not necessarily doing this project correctly. That's for you to do, but I'm just providing examples. And so what I do is so I'm going to call this one F name for first name, and this isn't going to be last, it's going to be first for first name. I'm going to call this one, I'll just call it year as well, and I can call this one year. And, or actually, that one should be book. So I'll call this one book. And I'll name this one book. And what I'll do is I'll just Control X, Control V, so they're in order. So what I've done is in JavaScript, I've told it whatever is entered into these boxes, I want you to look for that information, okay? So get element by ID. So here's the element, here's the ID, and then whatever value is in that box, okay? Now, if you remember at the top of this conversation, I said that if you want your user to interact with your web page, like clicking a button, you're most likely going to have to wrap it in a function. So here's what you do. So you type function, and you give it a unique name. So I'm going to call it bib. And I'm going to put these parentheses like this, and you do curly brackets and curly bracket. And you're used to these curly brackets. It's sort of the same setup as CSS. Okay, so like, sort of looking like CSS. So give it a unique name, and you do the parentheses. Okay, so here is a function. And so ideally when this button is clicked, it's going to look for a function, and it's going to run all this stuff. Okay, so if there is a function, we still need to hook up the button. Okay, we need the button to do something. So what do you want the button to do? Well, you do what's called an on-click, and this is just a regular sort of action that is defined within the code. There's a lot of other ones. You could do like on a page load. You can do, well, one would be an alert. So just you define how the user is going to be interacting with the element right here. So same thing, camel case. You do on click equals, and you provide the function name. So it's bib, and this is important. Sometimes I leave this out. It's important to leave in the parentheses right here. So think of it like this. You click the button and think of like a tunnel. So you create a tunnel on click, okay? The instructions or the act of clicking is going to tunnel from here to here and then run that code. So it's kind of like you're connecting tunnels. So when you put in information, you want it to click, but remember we need it to pop up like down here. So that means we have to give it a command to say, put the information right here. And to do that, we're going to use document write. But we still have to define something because we have to link it. So if you do a document write and tell, hey, when I put in information and click this button, it's going to load the information just up here by default. But you don't want it right there. You want it somewhere else. Okay. So we have to do two different things. First, we have to define what, and we have to name it. We have to define what's being written. Okay, and we're going to have to ID it. And it's something similar to this. I'm going to give it a name ahead of time. And it's going to be site 1, okay? And we want it to go to inner HTML. Oops, messed up. I don't need the equal sign. I just need it right there. Put the equal sign on the wrong side there. So inner HTML equals, and this is where you do the concatenation. So you have all these names, last, first, year. So we're going to pause on that because you have to assemble it correctly. We're going to pause on that, but we still need to get this right here. And I provided a name site1, and it's similar to this up here. So I'm going to go paragraph because I want the information to be in a specific format, so I have to provide it some HTML. And I'm going to ID this as site 1. And then I give it an NP tag, end P, so an end paragraph tag. So I made some formatting changes, so I want to make sure and review. So first up, you have your form, you have your inputs, and I just put a class in there so you can style the input box if you want. We have the ID set to LName, FName, book, and year. You want to make sure the button is on the outside of the form, okay, because the button is different than the form itself. And you have your function, you have bib, and then constant LName, FName, book, year, And I tried to make these consistent, and you can make these consistent and it won't really mess with anything. And then you're doing a document, get element by ID, site one. And remember, you put this up here, site one, and that's going to go inner HTML, which means in here. And we're just going to mess with L name right now. So I'm going to put in whatever, and it spits out. So if I go L name plus F name plus, let's make sure, make sure I get some spaces here. And I do book plus and year. So I want to reload. So I'm going to put in ASD, FGH, JKL, XCD, and it's all smushed together. So remember, you need to go back to what you did with concatenate, where you add the quotes. So there's plus, and then quote, space, quote, and then you reload and you'll start to see that. So when you get a whole phrase, you should be able to copy and paste it and drop it into a document. Now, there may be more to this than just the last name, first name, book, and year. So make sure you add a constant, give it unique names, and then you give it you give it an input box. But once you set up the function and get that working, I mean, honestly, you can take all this out. You don't have to do this. And if you get it working like this, you have your boxes, but don't worry about it. Just check the code by doing it this way first. Oops, forgot a squiggly. Deleted too much. And let's see. And there you go. So maybe start by getting one hooked up and done. Okay, don't put a ton of work in and then ask like, oh no, where did it screw up? And once you get one working, Control C, Control V. Now watch this. So there's L name. It's going to report L name, but there's no F name. So you want to make sure that if you copy and paste, you need to make sure that your IDs are lined up. Anyways, okay. So one thing I do want to show you is how to get multiples of these. And this is where naming can get kind of tricky, and you really want to keep this stuff straight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this twice. Okay, so everything has the same name, and I want to copy and paste this twice. So whatever you put in here, you want to copy and paste it twice. Because when you do a bibliography, you're not necessarily just going after a book. It could be an article. You could have multiple authors and all of that stuff. So for this assignment, I want you to try 3 unique ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the naming styles. So I'm going to call, so this is pretty consistent, L name, F name, book, year. So if I'm going to do a website, I'm going to say web, okay? And I'm going to call this year 2, L name 2, F name 2. And let me add some breaks between this so you can see the difference in what's going on. Then I'll reload it. There you go. So here's some breaks. So there's going to be 2 different ones. You can put a name right here. So I have L name 2, F name 2, web, and year 2. Okay. So I'm going to call this L name 2. I'll make sure that that's F name. up there, and that one's F name. So L name 2, F name 2, and this is going to be F name 2. And I want to change the bib. So I'm going to call this bib 2. And here's my second button. So I'm going to call this bib 2. So these two match. Because if you don't change it up here and run it, it's going to be looking right here and it's going to run the wrong information. And since the site 1 name is taken, I'm going to have to go site 2 and site 2. And if this is L name and it's going to print L name there, I want to change this one to L name 2. So again, what I've done is I'm creating 2 different easybibs, one for, say, a book and one for a website. So just to make sure it works, okay, I'm gonna just put Clayson. That works. And then not Clayson. You want different text in there. Not Clayson. And there you go. And then just like everything else, you make sure you give it a unique name and then concatenate it the way that you want. F name 2. So I'll reload. And this one is not Clayson, Mr. And there you go. Go ahead and get started on this, and there you are.